Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Mack, and I'm the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Association for Middle Level Education. And we are a proud affiliate of AMLE. I know some of you are members of AMLE. It's our pleasure this evening to bring you the sixth in our webinar series, along with Eastern University. This evening, our program is Navigating Uncertainty. And we're sure that this is something that everyone has been dealing with on a daily basis. Our presenter this evening is a great friend, consultant, Jen Cort. Jen has been doing work with middle level and high school and elementary students for years. Actually, Jen, it's not been that long, but she's a former counselor. She's a former middle level administrator. And right now she is a top expert in the area of equity and diversity. And Jen will have some great things to share with us. Along with Jen this evening, we have one of our regular co-hosts, Dr. Judy Brook. And Judy is also an amazing expert. She has so much expertise in middle level, a place where she spent her entire career. She's been an educator at both Shippensburg University and Gettysburg College, and is one of the top experts on middle level history. Where have the middle level philosophies come from? Those individuals who were our founding fathers. And she's one who is always on the lookout for what's current research say and how does it relate to what we've always done at the middle level. And Judy, we're so glad to have you here with us again this evening. So there are some objectives for the session this evening, and we're not going to read those to you, but we want to show connections with where everything has come and exactly what we need to do for young adolescents. We're going to be taking a look at the first, just a brief picture of who they were, some strategies to address the concerns of young adolescents, and Jen has a whole package of things for us to think about there. And of course, provide some resources. We're hoping that you'll leave here tonight and be able to say, you know what, I can use that tomorrow. And we think that that will be the case.
All right, I want to welcome everybody. Thank you for spending some time with us. We understand that it's probably been a very difficult couple of weeks, months, year now, and want to try to help you out as much as we can. In every single one of our webinars, we've addressed and given a shout out to our founding fathers. These are the six men who are really responsible for developing a middle level program to directly meet the developmental needs and characteristics of middle level kids. Until they started the work, people didn't even know what the characteristics of middle level kids were. They're the ones who decided that it had to go from junior high school, which was exactly that, a junior high school that was only subject based, and into a program that was focused on the kids most directly. Right now, we don't care what the name of the school is. Some of you, I'm sure, are in elementary schools. Some of you are in junior highs, middle level, K-8 schools. That really doesn't matter. What matters is that we all agree that we have some kids between the ages of, say, 9 and 14, 15 who need us. So let me give you some examples of some of the founders' advice. And there is a slide, I'm not going to read them again, but as you can see, most of what they were saying is about the kids. That first and foremost, you base whatever we do on research. It's not something that it just feels good, so we're going to do it. In the beginning of middle level, that kind of happened and some things fell apart. So we have to really keep up with the research. And luckily, it's one of the things that I like to do. So I try to put that into whatever kind of advice that I give. But I also realize that it is key to build relationships, meaningful relationships with the kids. They have to be able to trust us. And especially in turbulent times, it's really important that they learn to trust us. And in doing that, and especially again today, we have to understand that the kids are kids. They're going to make mistakes. We make mistakes. And so it's okay. We have to make that apparent to them that, you know, you don't have to hide it if you've made a mistake. It should be a learning opportunity. Middle level kids are very unsure of themselves. They are questioning who they are, what they're going to become. So they're really kind of confused and really need that relationship to help them get through it. To a lot of kids, it's school is one of the safest places they can go. And so we really have to treat them as if they're our own part of our own family. And I just want to say to give yourself a little grace now. Don't try to organize everything. Conrad Tepfer used to say to me all the time, don't try to do things the right way because there is no one right way. As soon as you decide that this is how everybody's going to do it, you're going to lose probably a third of the kids. So understand it's going to be evolving, and reflect on what you do and feel free to change it. So we're going to make some connections to this we believe. I don't know if you've seen the newest one book that has come out of AMLE, but it's the Successful Middle School, This We Believe. And the first This We Believe was written in 1982. I was a grad student with Conrad Tepfer at the time and had to do a lot of the research for him at that time. And that is also evolving. But what we've found is, and I'll just go through these really quickly, that schools for young adolescents have to be responsive, challenging, exploratory. And by that, I want to key on that one because to find kids' strengths, talents, and interests is really a major part of what we believe middle level education should be, so that all kids feel like they can be successful in some way. Then they're also empowering, equitable, engaging. They're fun. And I think especially now, it's okay sometimes just to stop, let the kids have a little fun. Let the kids kind of wind down, and understand too that in brain research, it shows that exercise helps the brain and water helps the brain. So sometimes let the kids get up, maybe do a couple jumping jacks, have a swig of water, and then go on. So give yourself some grace for that. So just in conclusion with the founders part of this, before I turn it over to Jen, I am going to read this. This was written by William Alexander, who is really known as the father of the middle school. And it's really interesting because he wrote this in the late 70s, and to see how much it reflects where we are today. So what Alexander said was, learning to cope with his changing body, a new mode of intellectual operations, and the desire to be a person in his own right presents a tremendous problem of adjustment for youngsters during this transitional period. Behavior of an emotional nature can be traced to one or several of these changes. If the transitional years are years of turbulent emotions, and evidence supports that notion that they are just that, turbulent, is it any wonder? During no other period of human growth and development are youngsters required to adjust themselves to so many changes simultaneously. So that's where they are now. They're changing. And because of what we know, here's a really good slide, I think, that I didn't make up. In teaching, you can't do the Bloom stuff until you take care of the Maslow stuff. So it's always Maslow before Bloom. And just to remind you, and you can come back and look at this, we know that you've all studied Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But if you look at this, the physiological needs first, safety and security is second. So the kids are never going to get to the self-actualization, the being good learners until they feel safe and secure in where they are. And notice the third one, the belonging, that they belong there, that they're going to be taken care of. So just a reminder to that, because nothing's going to happen. No learning's going to happen unless we understand that. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to the real expert of all of this, Jen Cort. Jen, take it away.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here with you all. And I've adjusted some of what I was going to do based on the events of the last few days. So I really wanted to give you all some strategies that you can use both to take care of yourself as well as your students. So picking things that work for both of you. And I'm going to give you all the resources that I talk about tonight. You're going to get an electronic pub. I'm going to put it in the chat that has everything in it. And I'm also always happy to brainstorm with you at another time. So let me just go through. I'm really about trying to find your footing in uncertain times and thinking about what it is that we most need to focus on. My motto is inviting the elephants in the room to tea. So please, if you have questions or challenges or ideas you want to share with each other, boy, would I love to have you share ideas with each other. So either just put it in the chat or send it to panelists, or just unmute yourself and or ask to be unmuted, and we can go from there. So this is an activity, this really gets at the Maslow's taking care of ourselves. And I'm going to walk us through it briefly, but it's one that I've done I do a lot of mindfulness work with kids, and I have for a very long time. I chose this activity because way back when I was a middle school counselor, one of my students told me I now work for him. He's one of my bosses at a school that I work for. And he said he still remembers doing this and that it helped him a lot. So he's actually the person who told me that he described being in middle school as, you know, when you go to the beach or you've seen them at the beach, the popcorn machines, and everybody puts in all the same ingredients, the same amount every day. And some days it's perfectly popped, and some days it's burnt, and some days it's in the middle. And that's kind of what it feels like being in middle school. So our task is really to be grounding points for them, to be anchors for them. So we'll walk through this part briefly, and then I'll explain a little bit more, but I'd like you to just take a minute and really plant your feet firmly on the floor. If you're standing, do that. If you're sitting, either way. And if you're sitting, put your hands firmly on your thighs so you can really feel them. And we're going to do two parts of this. The first part is we're going to use 3x4 breathing throughout. 3x4 breathing is breathing in for 4 through your nose, holding for 4, releasing for 4 through your mouth. So we'll do one of those, and then I'll walk you through. So if you could just do 1 3x4 breath. Okay, so for the first version of this, what you would do is have them, and yourselves as well, press into every space they are. So if their feet, press their heels into the ground and then relax, and then toes into the ground and then relax. You move up through the body so that you're flexing and relaxing to change up the energy in the body. This other one is, I'd like you to put one hand on your chest and one hand on your stomach. And we're going to do 3x4 breathing again, but this time we're going to have the air firstly go into our stomach, so the hand on our stomach rises. And again. And now we're going to breathe so the hand on our chest rises and our ribs expand, our lungs fill with air. And continuing to breathe, please visualize the part of your body that signals to you when you're stressed or uncomfortable or challenged or feeling uncertain. Where do you feel that in your body? And then try to breathe into that space. If you don't yet know where that part of your body is, that makes you typical of a lot of people. But we have this part of our brain, it's left over in the limbic system, in the ancient part of our brain, that comes from run or you'll be eaten. And we've kept this part of our brain with us. And what it does is it alerts us to when we're feeling something vulnerable, uncomfortable, uncertain, anything like that. And it gets louder and louder until we pay attention to it. And many of us as educators, we ask our students if they have headaches chronically or stomach aches, we might ask them if something's bothering them. And that's our way of helping them to identify their physical location of feelings. This activity, you would want to do, multiple breaths into the stomach, multiple breaths into the chest, have them maybe think about a situation when they felt uncomfortable or challenged, and then try to visualize that in their body. And practicing this is really helpful because when you know where that part of your body is, when it signals to you in the small signals, you can listen to it, attend to it, and help to interrupt going from feeling uncertain to feeling really anxious. And I'm going to give you a plan that you can use with them at the end. But this is one that you just want to maybe repeat a few times. And I always like to have students take turns doing some kind of mindfulness activity. So we're empowering them to lead us through things, and so that we're switching off. Another strategy is to be thinking about how one of the things that has shifted over the past few years, or longer than that, in educational pedagogy, is we've shifted away from that we need to be the sage on the stage to, we're supposed to have all the answers and be in the front of the room, and to that we're supposed to be the guide on the side. So we're learning from our students, with our students, and they're learning from us, and we're facilitating them learning from each other. I think of this as a time of co-construction, that we can co-construct the ethos in our classes and in our advisories and in the halls or Zoom rooms or wherever they are. And so even naming some of these things for students, like what's something that helps you when you feel uncomfortable, when you feel uncertain? This is something that helps me, and you have a sharing time. I'm currently a high school counselor, and one of the things that we do is we take turns sharing strategies that we've used in the past week, and also take turns sharing things that we notice we're not doing as much of, such as Judy mentioned water. That comes up a lot from students, that they aren't drinking enough water. So another way to think about this, and I have an article that I can give you on this if you would like, is thinking about time and energy. So if we go back to that Maslow's list of that we need to focus on the basic needs in order to get to the higher level needs and becoming good learners. If we think about this as that we have the same amount of time every day, we're given the same amount of time every day, and we're also given a finite amount of energy. So if you think of them both as like a pie, once time is spent on something, we can't get that time back. Similarly with energy, once our energy is allocated to something or taken by something, and stress is a huge energy consumer, we don't have that energy back. So that means we're asking kids to do things with less energy available to them. So I like to talk with middle schoolers about this, and I get into how the brain works and how, like, if they're feeling overwhelmed, that's not because they're bad or they're not paying attention. It's because there's a need that's not being met, and helping them to even think about how much time am I spending on things and how much energy am I spending on things. You can help them to assess themselves. In schools that I've done this with, where we're really focusing on it, we can actually reduce the amount of study time, but increase grades. And that happens by thinking about the times when your students may tell you that they spent a lot of time studying, and they have spent a lot of time. They're not telling you something that isn't true, but their brain wasn't engaged. So their energy wasn't there. And when those are both there, when they're on top of each other, time and energy are linked together, they're able to spend less time to doing the tasks that we want them to do. So helping them to think about all the things they do that take their energy for them, and then what are some things they could do to get it back. And this is part of where the connection with the physical location of feelings comes up. And if you're interested, you can just email me, and I will send you an activity that you can do with students that helps them to look at how much time they're spending and how much energy they're spending. Actually, I think I have it on my website too. If you look up under advisory freebies, my website is just untitled.com. Very easy. And I give away stuff on there all the time. So if you don't see it, just email me and I will make sure you have it. So this is a model that I think is really important. It's important for all of us, and it's really important for kids right now, is to help them to understand that one of the ways that we are most challenged is when we're listening to somebody, when somebody's speaking, we often move from step 1 to step 4, and we miss 2 and 3. And 2 and 3 is where the misunderstandings happen, where hurt happens, where empathy needs to happen. And I'll just walk you through those really quickly. Listening is when you can say back you can repeat back what the person said almost verbatim. It's kind of, I think of it like a transcript. So that's where you've just gotten the information and you don't have to do anything with it yet, but you can repeat it back. Hearing is really different. Hearing is when you take what you heard and you're able to maybe put it in your own words, maybe make it briefer, maybe add some nuance, but the person who spoke still feels that you got what they said. So there's listening, that's a transcript. The next is thinking about how you nuance the language or make or abbreviate it to show that you still heard it. 3 cannot be overlooked. This is where empathy comes in. This is where an emotional connection comes in. This is where somebody who is looking at us feels like they really have been heard. And that's really important. You know, I could never count the number of times students would be in my office when I was a principal and they would say something like, you know, well, this is what happened. And the other person would say, you're not hearing me. And they would repeat back the words, but they still weren't feeling heard. And it's because of that emotional connection. So I did this quite a bit earlier this year with some students when I was doing some work around the election. We talked about those 4 stages because the 4 stages respond. That's when you might say, I need to think about this, or here's what I'd like to do, or can we talk about it later? It's more of like a plan. It's like an action. That doesn't mean they have to talk through all these steps, but they can practice it and get pretty quick at being able to move through them while they're in a conversation. It's a skill that they learn and a skill that they practice. And so we started off with giving some scenarios, some role plays, and had them practice what was the listening skill, what would they do if they were hearing, what emotion would they attach, and then what they would respond, so that then they could get faster at it. And this 4-step process is one that a lot of kids have given me feedback about. You know, they've asked me to have their parents learn it and their teachers learn it, and to help them to understand each other better. So this, I want to just give you the top 5 strategies that I use in almost any situation. I do a lot of work with schools around really difficult conversations, and they're often asking me to give information, to give a workshop on a specific topic. For example, after last Wednesday, lots of schools were asking for that. And I kept coming back to that we need a set of core strategies that you could use in any situation and then build out from there. So these, and I've got these, I'm going to put them in the EPUB in your chat, and they're plumped out more in the chat, but just to go through them is to ask at the beginning, what happened? So this is when, if you notice a student's really agitated, or you yourself are feeling agitated, or one of your colleagues, ask, when did you first notice this and what was going on? With middle schoolers, because they vacillate between being very concrete and abstract, and it goes back and forth, I like to use strategies like asking them, if I were there and I were filming, but I couldn't hear anything, what would I see? And if I were recording, but I couldn't see anything, what would I hear? Just to get them to walk through that so that they can describe to you what happened at the beginning. And it's a great place to help them identify their emotions. The second is to develop a script. And this doesn't mean a robotic kind of script, but if there are situations that you know are uncomfortable for you, and this is, again, these are all strategies you can use for yourself, with your colleagues, and with students. If there's a situation that you know you're uncomfortable with, or you know you're going to have a hard time talking about, it's a great time to think about, what would I want my students to know in that moment, and what would I say to them, so that you could develop what you would say when you're not in that moment, which makes it easier to access that strategy, which helps you to feel more comfortable and confident. And I like students to develop scripts too. This number 3 is my my absolute favorites. Answer in one sentence. When we're nervous, anxious, uncomfortable, stressed, when the all of our energy gets going, we tend to do one of two things. We either go on and on and on with our words. We have way too many words coming out of our mouths, or we have way too few and we're holding them all in. Forcing yourself to answer in one sentence, a legit sentence, not a sentence that runs on and on forever, but a sentence, helps you to pause, gather your thoughts, be strategic in what you're going to say, and then listen. And that's when the 4 stages of listening come in. So I like to teach students this too, so that they can think about, answering in one sentence. And you can even have it be a classroom strategy of, how will we respond how can we support each other when we make mistakes around this? Or how can we help to remind each other to use one sentence? So the practice of it though, is you would use a sentence or the speaker would use a sentence. Then you listen, then another sentence, and you go back and forth until you feel like you've concluded the conversation. And I always like to end with, okay, if we want to come back to this later, we can, so that you're inviting the person to come back to you if they need to. If you're talking to kids and they're having a hard time, I always like to let them know that I'm not going to bring it up to you without you knowing ahead of time, so that when you see me, you don't have to worry about me bringing these things up to you. But you could bring it up to me and we can talk about it. So two things are: one, to let them know you might want to check in later, and 2, that you're not going to bring it up with them when you see them. Number 4, Judy talked about this, having grace for ourselves, giving ourselves time. We are not expected to, and nor should we be, to be able to respond to everything right when it happens. Sending a message to our students of taking time to think about something, to be deliberative, to have discernment, is an important message for them to have. So the pieces you want to, I always think of that like the meat in the middle of the sandwich. The bread would be to let them know something like, that's a really important question. I need to think about it. And I'll come back to you. Or one of the scripts I use when I'm challenged is, that's such an important topic. It needs more time than I'm able to give it right now. I'm going to spend some time and I'm going to come back to you, and you let them know when you're going to come back to them. But they are so programmed right now in society that they need an immediate response. So sending a message of that you need time to think about this is actually a great counter message to what they're having and what they're experiencing in some other places. And then this next one is one that I co-constructed with students. When you think I saw or heard, but you didn't see or hear me respond, I need you to, and the ... are you fill in what you would like them to do. In my case, I like students to tell me if they think I saw or heard something, but I don't end with that, because I know that if they were comfortable telling me, they already would. So sometimes they feel comfortable doing so and sometimes they don't. So in that case, I will say, you could also email me. You could tell, you name somebody else they could tell and ask them to tell you. You could bring a friend or something like that. This strategy puts you in partnership with them. So you're not expected to satisfy all their needs that you're not even sure what they are, but also gives them some agency to let you know when you needed something to be seen or something needed to be seen. And this is for a couple of reasons. Sometimes when we are in uncertain times or the conversation is challenging for us, sometimes we won't address it because we don't know how to, or because we're hoping it'll go away. A lot of times we don't address it because we're not really sure that it happened, or we didn't see it happen, or we may not get the gravity that the students are experiencing with it. So this strategy helps them to be able to be in partnership with us in some ways, back to that era of co-construction. And when I'm introducing that with students, I just like to start off any new unit, new class, new advisory, whatever it is, and just say, let's think about the way we're going to be together with some norms, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And that would be one of the norms. So let's see. And cannot be overlooked how important it is to talk about nonverbal communication, your own nonverbal communication and nonverbal communication discussions with students, and helping them to see that a vast majority of our interpretations of how somebody responds to us come to us through nonverbal communication. Now, nonverbal communication is our body language. It's also our resting face. I was talking with some of my students, and we were talking about our resting faces, what we look like when we're not really animated or anything, and the messages it might send. And so we were having a discussion about it. And one of my students pointed out that when I'm listening or thinking, I tend to put my chin on the palm of my hand and I look at them. And he was saying that actually sometimes sends a message of disinterest. It's actually because I'm so interested that I'm doing it, but it was important for me to know that. So some ways you can talk about this are, show pictures of people like this, like what kinds of messages might they be sending, having them think through and imagine how those people are feeling. The nonverbal communication also includes thinking about habits of speech. Some people, when they're stressed, really need time to think. And so they often fall quiet, which can send the message of, I don't care, or I don't have anything to say. So it's good to help them to learn. If you're somebody who needs think time, just say, I need to think about that. Some people go on and on and on, and that's why the one sentence is helpful. Some people, their voices go up when they're stressed or anxious. Some people, their voices go down, and it's just something for them to be looking at and paying attention to. Preferences for processing refers to if you need think time, or if you're somebody who does better thinking aloud, thinking and speaking. So just naming that. And tone of voice has to do both with, as I said, whether your voice goes up in times of stress or goes down, but also the cadence of our speech, how quickly we're speaking, and the way, if our voice is always up when we're anxious, it can make other people anxious. And so helping, when they know that, when they start to learn that about themselves, you can have them practice a counter means of communication. I know for myself that when I'm feeling uncertain, my voice goes up and I speak very fast. And so I've had to train myself, and it's something I still struggle with, but I've had to train myself to go low and slow, to slow down and speak lower. And so any of those kinds of strategies are great to teach them, because for one, a lot of them don't know that that is such a powerful communicator. And two, it's very strategy focused, and they have all the agency and power in it. I would also, of course, include a nonverbal communication for them to think about their use of emojis, and how they are communicating, or memes, or anything that they're using that are other than words, about the unintentional messages they may be sending with those. All right, a few more strategies. Thinking about, and this is in the EPUB, setting up your norms, the norms of your space. So norms are always present, always. In every space we're in, there are norms. Norms are the ways in which we behave with each other. They're either intentionally created or unintentionally created. An intentionally created norm might be when we're in the Zoom classroom, you are muted unless you're talking, or when we're in our physical classroom, these are the places that you're going to sit. Unintentional norms are, kids just talk anytime, or they just fall into muting themselves, but you haven't set that as a tone, and they sit anywhere. And norms also reinforce power structures. So thinking about if there are students who are more popular, or who are from the majority group in the space they're in, so by race or by gender, or more, being really mindful ourselves as educators, calling on them first or more often than others. And that's a great thing to have, a peer observer to help you think that through, because we can, as adults, unintentionally reinforce those power structures by calling on those students more, or talking with those students more, engaging with them more. So thinking about how we create norms, intentional norms, always my preference. Outline the goals. So we are in some uncertain times right now, and we are likely heading into more uncertainty. And so one of the goals might be, saying to the students, like, I'd like us to be able to be a resource for each other. So I'd like us, I know that it's hard to focus if your brain is consumed somewhere else. So let's think about how we treat each other, and that would be creating norms. That would be one of the goals. So the norms are always connected to the values, not the habits. So that means, whatever the value is of your school or of your classroom or the space you're in, make sure that your norm represents that. A simplistic way of thinking about it is the value might be physical activity, but the habit might be running around at recess. So you want to go back to the value. They include the voice of all. This does not mean that you are not overall the person who is in charge, but it does mean that everyone's voice is included. We know that one of the ways we help people to feel more certain in uncertain times is to make sure they feel seen and heard. So as many opportunities as we have to create spaces for them to do that, the better. I like to have norms in the beginning of the year, the beginning of semester, and the beginning of anything new, but also to check them regularly, to review and revise them as needed. And, definitely like before and after a break or even a weekend. And you can have students read off the norms each time you review them, maybe ask them to put them in their own words, but still represent what was the intention, which helps to reinforce those 4 stages of listening. They communicate boundaries. So if you have expectations of them, you want to make sure that you're voicing those. These would not be the rules of the classroom, though. These would be more along the lines of, how you're going to treat each other. How do we treat each other when we make a mistake? That kind of thing. This is, if there's nothing else that you take away from norms work, please take this away. Develop a challenge plan. Middle schoolers are supposed to challenge things. It's one of their jobs. It's how they test things out. And a lot of times we can spend time working with them to construct the norms. And then when they're challenged, that can be really stressful, particularly if we're in uncertain times. So for every norm you create, you just want to ask, what will we do if this doesn't work? Or what will we do if we forget about this? And get them to be thinking about what they'll do, how they'll talk to each other, how they'll listen to each other. All right, so always, always, always thinking of our work as care-centered first. That this we believe statements always come back to putting student learning in the center, making sure that we are responding to students, making sure that we are providing support for them, not just trying to get education and information in and out of them. So just always reminding ourselves that we are care-centered first. And then I'm going to ask you, if you have something to write with, to please have it available to you. I'm going to walk us through an activity that has been really powerful. It was co-constructed with students, and I want to give it for you to use for yourself and for your students should you want to. All right, so, and you can type this if you want to. And this is written up for you as well. So thinking about our care plan, we know that when we think about self-care or anything that often feels like another thing on the to-do list, especially in times of COVID. And we know that for those of us who engage in self-care strategies, we often engage in 1 or 2, and then we stop after that if it doesn't work. The more uncertain we are, the more self-care strategies we need. And we need to take care of all different parts of our body and of ourselves. So I'll walk you through a few parts of this and then describe the rest. And then we'll get to some questions and answers, hopefully some answers. And I'm really hoping, again, that you all will share strategies with each other. All right, so first, I'd like you to just think through the things that you look at that make you feel good, make you feel comforted, make you feel cared for. And just write, this will not be an exhaustive list. You want to spend more time on this, of course. And I even have done one day and then tell them what the next one is. And the next day we do the next one. So we're like continuing it throughout our week. But just make a list of the things that you like to look at that make you feel good or secure or bring a smile to your face. And I'm sure you're not done, but I'm going to ask you to just do this part. I'd like you to circle those things on your list that you have ready access to, that you have available to you. Leave no circle around those that are person, place, or time specific. You need to be with a person or at a certain time or at a certain place. And if you have your kids, your students coming to school physically, then I like to ask them, like, what's something that you could carry in your backpack, and let them be creative. If they're allowed to bring their phones to school, would a picture be okay? So again, you would have some things that you like to look at that make you feel good. You're circling those that you have ready access to and leaving no circle around those that are person, place, or time specific. We'll walk through another one. This would be the foods, same prompt. What are the foods that you like to eat that make you feel good and make you feel, warm and cozy or anything like that? And just make your list first, and then to go back and circle those that you have immediate access to or are available to you, and leave no circle around those that are person, place, or time specific. As I said, you'd spend more time on these, but I just want to walk through what the other terms mean because they're not all immediately obvious. Sounds, the things you like to listen to. And here again, being creative, like if there's something that one of my students said that he really liked to hear his grandmother singing, and he's not able to see her because of COVID. So they recorded it and he has it that he can play for himself. Next would be textures, and this is one that's overlooked. For textures, we're thinking about what are the things that you like to touch or wear or have on you. So anything like that just makes you feel really, really good. And actually, side note, I was doing this activity with some students, and one of my students described a series of textures that he did not like to touch. And from that, the school counselor was on the call, and she realized that he might have some sensory issues, and got him to work with the school's occupational therapist, and he did. And they wouldn't have known that if they hadn't thought about the things they don't like as well. He really wanted to do the things he didn't like as well as the ones that he did like. Next are temperatures, and this would be both the temperatures around us, like, the temperature you like to sleep in or your favorite temperature outside, as well as the temperatures of food or drinks. And that might seem like it's not always related, but they're different. Our body responds differently to different temperatures. One example is I drink tea all the time. I love hot tea, cold tea, doesn't matter. If I'm feeling uncertain, only hot tea is going to make me feel better. And I didn't know that about myself until I really started thinking about how I would take care of all the different ways I experience things. Drinks are pretty self-explanatory, as are scents. Scent is one of the strongest memory evokers. So having them think about, maybe their favorite food and what does it smell like? And that's another way to connect it. Tastes are different than foods, so they're connected. This has to do with the salt, sour, sweet, and bitter tastes. Thoughts we have with us all the time. By thoughts, I'm thinking of puzzles, memories, daydreams, anything like that that helps to just comfort you, make you feel good. And then physical movements. And so if you did this, and this is something I encourage you to do for you, because if you're working with students who are uncertain, you are definitely experiencing parts of that. You go through all of these. You make a list. I like to have them leave blanks at the bottom of each category so they can add to them over time. It's a great family activity too, a nice like home and school connection with families. And by families, I mean whoever it is that's taking care of and loving the child. And it's great for faculty and staff, so you can think about those things. And I know at our school, we made like little care things because we're on Zoom. And so I asked our students to have, wherever it is that they did their work, to have a couple of the things that fell into these categories physically nearby. And we started off doing that through a scavenger hunt. Like, please go find something that a picture of or a description of or anything like that fits the foods you like. And so then we made little boards, and some of us have things on our desks or the spaces where we're doing classwork. A couple other things to think about is, of course, if you're middle level educators, so a lot of these things are things that you already know, but I just want to reinforce the experience the kids are having is often mirrored in the adults around them, including ourselves. So really thinking about any ways that the support can be mutual or for everybody. Also just naming things, just naming, there's a lot going on. How are we feeling about it? Two strategies with that I love. One, if we're in person, I like to give students, let's take 5 minutes and just stop and jot. Let's write down or draw the things that are on our minds, and then invite them to share it if they want to or not. And then, when I was in the classroom, I like to have a bulletin board that students could also put things up if they wanted to let other people know what was going on with them. So stop and jot, or drop and draw. So you drop your pencil, you drop your other things and you just draw. Another one is to take, if you're in Zoom, and I'll just describe how to do this. If you're in Zoom, or some other, I don't know how to do it on Google Meet, but a lot of the platforms have the ability to rename yourself. And of course, you want to do this after a norms discussion. But let's say we're all in one room. I would say hover over your picture, and in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see 3 dots. And if you click on those, one of those dots is rename. So if you pick a name that everyone would use, like the name of your school or something like that, maybe it's Cort School or something like, whatever it is, and everyone has that same name, then you could pose a question like, how are we doing today? What's on your minds? What are some things that are bothering you or consuming your energy in particular? And then they put it in the chat. And so what happens is you get a real sense of what's going on with them, but they don't have to show their name with what's going on. So all you would see is Cort School says rate on the Capitol is very stressful. Cort School says I got in an argument with my mom. So you'd have all that. Of course, please make sure it's prefaced with norms, and please make sure to remind them to rename themselves back to their proper name as soon as possible. So those are some strategies. And then I have a couple of resources for you. This is one that I like to use all the time. What's one thing I commit to saying, doing, or thinking differently, and writing it down for you to write down for yourself or for your students, and then turn to a partner and share. Another strategy along these lines that I like to use with middle schoolers is to ask them not so much what's going on with them, but what they imagine other middle schoolers might be feeling, so that they're telling you really what's going on with them, but they're not naming what's going on. They're not naming themselves in it. So that's a great one too. If it was like, if there was a classroom over there and and I was to go ask all those students how they're feeling, what's going on, what do you think they might tell me? Then this is my podcast, and I welcome any of you who want to be on it. It's just focused on equity, diversity, inclusion, and justice in schools. And so it's a lot of like, how do we have hard conversations with kids? It's on all podcast apps. It's free. Nobody gets anything for it. We're all volunteers. So I would love for you to participate, be a guest. Just email me if you're interested. And then you're going to get the resources through Google that I'm going to put in the chat as soon as I'm done screen sharing. But the other is if you're on Pinterest, which is like a bulletin board site to collect resources, I have thousands of pins broken down by topic. So I have like middle schoolers, book lists, talking about race with kids. So it's all broken down, and you can just go and look and find articles and blogs and YouTubes and TED Talks and stuff, just as a place to help organize resources. And I add to it all the time. So if you're on Pinterest, you just follow me. Again, I don't get anything for it. I'm not going to email you blast you. It'll just let you know when new resources have been added. And I am always happy to give you resources. I love to share ideas. I love to be able to look up things and share them with you. So you're welcome to get in touch with me anytime. I have the immense privilege of being an ex officio board member for PAMLE. So I get to be at their conferences and everything, and love to spend time thinking about middle school, and particularly in Pennsylvania. And I also have the privilege of writing quite a bit for AMLE. And so those things go out through those channels. So, all right, that was lickety split and lots shared. And I don't expect you to have all of it. I just wanted to walk through some of the things that I'm going to put in the chat for you. And I would love to hear what your questions are. What's on your mind?
Jen, we had one question in the chat
Okay.
from Adam Mullis, I believe. It says, question for advice to all looking for ways to connect with the student who was retained last year with a different teacher team, has a very dysfunctional family structure, and a student whose priorities does not include their education. By the way, they are completely virtual. Would love to fully connect with this student. Any advice welcome.
Wow.
Well, I have to say that when I was teaching 7th grade one year, I had a boy named Jeff who was the only 7th grader who applied for a parking place at the school because he turned 16 during his 7th grade year with me. He had been retained 3 times. And he was, I kind of had the reputation of taking the kids that nobody else wanted. And what I found out about Jeff, he told me that no one in his family on either side had ever graduated from high school. And he had a difficulty reading. He was very big. I mean, he was 16. The rest of the kids, you know what a lot of the 7th grade boys look like. You know, they look like little leprechauns, and he looked like an adult, so he didn't fit in. And one of the things that I did with him, as a matter of fact, I did with all my kids, is at the beginning of the year, I always ask them, what is your strength? What do you like to do? What do you find enjoyable? Much like Jen was saying, you know, find what it is that makes you happy. And Jeff told me that he really liked to draw. And I was teaching science that year. I was elementary certified, so I can teach anything. And what we did was, you know, I said, I need help drawing the worksheets, the bulletin boards, because I can't draw. I mean, I can't draw a snowman in a snowstorm. So that's what I asked Jeff to do. And since it was science, I would ask him when we were discussing the cell then, would you draw something for me about the parts of the cell? And he did. So no matter what it was that I asked him to draw, he really was quite good at his illustrations. And what was interesting was that I did have him in during lunchtime because he felt uncomfortable. Now this was in school, but he felt uncomfortable at lunch with all the other kids because he didn't really share any other interests with those kids since he was so much older and bigger. And what I found was, because Jeff was doing artwork for the subject, he actually learned the material because he was also a visual learner. He wasn't a good reader, but he was a visual learner. And he learned that, and he was very excited because he earned his first C in science ever by learning that stuff. But what I did was I also changed the exams for him so that he could draw his answers. And I drew some of the questions for him. So I went in through his strengths. So that's a long answer to a short question and just one example, but I think it's really validating them. Like, I know that this is difficult for you, and you figure anybody who's been retained doesn't feel so good about themselves as a learner. And there's a really good quote that I read from efficacy.com. Smart is not something you are, smart is something you get. So if you've been retained, then we have to figure out some different way of reaching you. So like with Jeff, it was through his art. And just taking the time to find that out. And what was interesting was that year I also had a bunch of kids who had been in juvenile justice system, and other teachers were having difficulties with keeping the kids decent, with their decent behavior. Jeff actually became my guardian. So if some other kids started mouthing off at me or whatever, because that's what they were used to, Jeff would just go over and say, "You don't talk to her like that." So, and we actually got to be very close. And I have to say, he did graduate from high school.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I'd love for anyone else who has strategies for how to support a student in that situation to share them. The two that I will add to Judy's beautiful story, which just warmed my heart, is one, to acknowledge that this must be difficult, and not telling them it's difficult, but just to acknowledge it. Because a lot of times students are held back, nobody talks to them about it. It's talked about around their backs. Actually, I have 3 strategies. Another one would be to ask them, what do you think the adults need to hear? Like, what did your other teachers, your previous teachers, not in a way for them to criticize the other teachers, but for them to say, like, what was missed? What was not heard from you, and what was missed? And then also to, when I was talking about the norms, remembering that norms reinforce power structures. So if you have a student who's been held back in your class, chances are that student's walking around with quite a bit of uncertainty, and other students are probably talking about that student. So just making sure that as much as possible, if there are corrections that need to happen, that they happen privately, which, we want to do with all students anyway. And also that if there are opportunities to build him up in front of other people, to really do that, so that you're helping to dismantle those power structures and put the student back in. Of course, it's a tricky balance though, because you don't want them to be like the teacher's pet, which can affect their social life as well. But I think just acknowledging it is one thing. Also asking, are your basic needs being met? And if not, maybe are there school resources that could support that student at home? I see a couple of ideas and a couple of things in the chat. Love it, Judy. You're my kind of educator. Love the story. Also struggling with virtual distance. I've kept him aside and had these questions with him. He openly expresses that he's not dumb, and I can realize that through the work he does that's complete. I've asked him about his future goals, and he clearly articulates that, sorry, I cut mine off, that it doesn't involve a high school degree. And, I don't know if your area has any vocational education, if that's something of interest, and maybe using Judy's strategy of finding out what he really likes to do, and then seeing if there are resources in your school system that might appeal to that. I had a student who knew he wasn't going to graduate from high school, but he was always taking things apart and putting them together in class, like messing with the bolts on the desk and stuff. And we got him into one of our VOTEC programs, and he ended up doing mechanical work and really liked it. So I don't know if that's an option. And if anyone else has strategies, please put them in the chat, or suggestions.
Well, another thing that you might try that I found worked pretty well. A lot of kids who struggle really sometimes don't understand the test questions. You hear a lot of times, well, I studied, but I still failed it. I didn't know. So one of the strategies that I started to use to help kids feel that they could be successful with assessments, and don't even get me started on assessments, that's a whole nother webinar. But one of the things that I started to do is for extra credit on any assessment, my question was, tell me something about this subject that you know that I didn't ask. And you can give them a lot of credit if you see, well, they missed a question on this topic, but look, they knew it. So they just didn't understand my question. So giving them that opportunity to articulate what they know in a different way, I think is also helpful. I really believe that, I mean, with this kid, you say he's not dumb, but he doesn't have goals for even high school. And I would want to talk to him about that, you know, and just and find out why. Is it just because his family, no one in his family has graduated from high school, or does he feel like he doesn't fit in with his peers? So there are a lot of reasons why he could be expressing that, and you can't help it if you don't know what they are, and he may not know himself. You know, that's the kind of thing where you say, well, let's sit down and talk about this and reflect on it. And really, now that we're in a virtual situation, it's easier to do that, because you can say, you know, after Zoom hours, you know, can you stay on and talk with me more about this so we can, so I can help you. And just getting back to what Jen was saying, that you're really listening and hearing what he's saying and responding to him.
And you add here that he has an into mechanics and automotive, and I think there's a certain level of reaching that we can do for students for whom that's not high school graduation and beyond, college and all that is not going to be their path, and to help remove some of the shame of that and the, you know, pressure around that, to really emphasizing is this is something you're really good at and interested in, and most people aren't. I mean, most people are not really good at working at doing mechanics work in cars. So I know it's 8 o'clock, and Judy and I are going to stick around for another half hour to answer questions and talk further. And if you want to stay with us, you are welcome to. And if not, we appreciate you being here. Did want to just point out that I put the EPUB in the chat. It's just an electronic publication. If you click on it, it'll open up. And then we talked quite a bit about this we believe, and I will put that in the chat as well. Oh, there's a question, and the question and answer says Bruce. So let me check that.
Yeah, there also is another question that was asked before that may have just been scrolled over on accident from Rosalind. It says, any suggestions to help with autistic meltdowns? Okay.
And we have a question here too, Julia, that we have that question, and then we have this other one. We've recently returned to in-person learning. I have a student who's having a hard time readjusting. His anxiety is causing him to be sick every morning. Any recommendations or activities that would be welcomed? Talking about his feelings seems to make it worse. I'll jump into that one. I would do some of the, like, that self-care plan, and anything, you know, I wouldn't go at from the front asking what his feelings are, but maybe asking things like, what do you think adults need to know about how students might be feeling today? Or also helping him to be thinking about strategies for himself, like what does help, when do you feel good, what supports are available, and acknowledging these are anxious times. His feelings are not unusual. They're actually really appropriate feelings to have given the situation we're in. And what we're finding is a lot of kids are feeling like adults are trying to talk them out of their feelings. And some of that's because we, the adults, are struggling with it as well. And some of it is because we just want to take care of them and make them feel better. So even just the acknowledgement of that, it makes sense to feel that way, and we're going to work with you. The physical symptoms, those physical symptoms are real. They are caused, in his case, they may be caused by social and emotional challenges such as anxiety, but the physical symptoms are real. So treating the physical symptoms may help give some space. You know, like if a student has a stomach ache, are there certain foods that, you know, bready foods help to absorb some of that acid, and so anything like that can be helpful.
And with the,
Judy, I didn't know if you want to.
Well, it's related too to I think to the autistic meltdown thing. If you have kids who have physical kinds of symptoms, very often their caregivers, their families can really help you with that. So establishing a really good relationship with the kids' families, and again, whoever it is who is taking care of them, I think is really important. I had a boy one time with very severe hemophilia. And I was nervous about it, and I didn't know what to do if he like fell or, you know, whatever. So I called in his parents and the school nurse, and we came up with a plan. And with a middle school kid, you know, asking them too, you know, how do you want me to respond if you are feeling ill, or if you're feeling anxious, or, you know, I mean, I'm willing to help you, but I think having a plan beforehand is really helpful, instead of waiting for something to happen and then trying to figure out what to do. And you know, with so many kids, it's going to be so individual. What's going to soothe one autistic child might not necessarily soothe another one. But it might be something as simple as a safe place to go, or something. I think the touching thing, you know, if they have that, a fabric or something that they find soothing, might be helpful. But they'd have to be able to do it in a safe space, because if it's safe, say if a kid has a blanket that they have a piece of a fabric, other kids could be pretty nasty and cruel if they see a kid like that. So having a safe place for them to go to calm their nerves too, I think is really important. So talking with the counselor and the school nurse, I think in a case like that is really essential. Getting help. We can't do it all just by ourselves.
I had started to mention the This We Believe statement. I'm putting that the link to it for AMLE in the chat as well, so you can look at it. There's some PDF versions of the overall, and then a place that you can look at the book as well.
It's really a helpful resource, I think.
Absolutely.
And Paul, are we going to be doing some book studies about that in the future?
That is a possibility. Yes, there's a very good possibility that's going to happen.
Yeah. So keep abreast of the PAMLE webpage to see what's going on, because we're planning these conferences as we go. And if people say, gee, I would really like a topic on X, whether it's, you know, the successful middle school or whatever, we'll certainly try to address it.
Yeah, thank you, Judy, for bringing that out. And that's so important that we hear from you. What are the topics that you need us to discuss? Who are the experts that you would like to hear from? And we can find them. We have great resources available to us, great resources. So don't hesitate to ask if there's something specific that you're looking for. And if you do go to the PAMLE website, you're going to find lots of resources right there. And there'll be links back to AMLE. There'll be links to all of our partners, lots of good things available for you.
And our webinars are all being recorded, including this one. So if you go to the website too, you can go back, see some of Jen's wonderful examples of what to do. She also did another webinar for us that had a lot of good information, a lot of good resources. So we've been doing these since, what was our first one, August or September?
This is
July.
our fifth one. Yeah.
Yeah.
July.
So there's a lot there at the site, and we're just trying to put out whatever we can to lend a hand during these turbulent times.
I wanted to add a strategy too for building off of Judy saying, you know, having something like a blanket. This isn't something that will help a full meltdown, but if you do the plan with them where they're thinking about what textures they like to touch and make them feel comfortable, then if somebody feels that physical location of feeling starting up, they're starting to get anxious or starting to get upset, have a code with them that, you know, I'm going to suggest you go get a drink of water means please go get a drink of water and stop by your locker and just have a moment touching whatever it is that you brought with you that gives you comfort, and then come back. So you can set that up privately, and let them know that, you're trying to help them. It's not a consequence or anything like that. And it just says, hey, so-and-so, might be a good time to get a drink of water. And that student knows that that's code. That's not when they're already at the meltdown stage, but if you can get them to recognize earlier when their feelings are starting to act up, then they can start to incorporate some of those strategies.
Jen, I think I just want to mention something important for all of these questions that were asked about specific groups of children. And that is, at most levels, but particularly at the middle level, every child needs to have an adult advocate. And it's not only important that the advocate knows who they are and is very willing to work with the child, but that the child also has a voice in that, especially with your most difficult cases. If they're having difficult issues that they're dealing with, they need to have a voice in who the people are within the team, within the school that they trust. And that individual will be able to help a great deal just because they establish a strong, consistent, non-judgmental relationship with that child. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And I'm not at all suggesting that that hasn't been tried at your schools, but there are many children that we need to take care of. Actually, every child we need to take care of, but those who have more significant issues need to know that the school is on their side and is working for them every single moment that they're there.
And Paul, if I could build on that, it's important to also check in with students to see who they feel most connected to, so that sometimes we'll think, they have an advisor, they have they have somebody who's assigned to them to be their advocate, but they may not connect with them in the same way. So they could have an advocate who is helping to navigate the system and know that it's okay to talk to somebody else altogether. And asking kids is a great way to find out. I think it should be a huge concern for all of us if a child can't name somebody that they feel connected to in the school. That's a sign that the school needs to think more creatively, and not to criticize or anything like that, but think really creatively about how to reach that child and support them.
I think it's interesting that the founders actually listed advocacy as one of the essential elements of a middle level school. And unfortunately, what happened, and Conrad Teffer used to talk about this quite a bit, where people started doing checklists in middle school. And so we put in an advisory program, and teachers grumbled because, I teach science, I don't teach advisory. And I remember I was one of the grumblers, even though I was a kid advocate, where we had to use this stupid book, Cindy Simon's Values Clarification, and go through and do all of these lame exercises as if they were going to do any good with the kids. And I knew they weren't. And what's interesting now is, schools then started saying, well, we're not going to do advisory programs. We're just going to, they're not working, so we're just going to throw them out. And what we learned is that, as Conrad said, there are a lot of schools that had advisory programs, but he would say they got the words, but they ain't got the tune. So what is the tune? And we don't necessarily need an advisory period. We need the tune of advisory. And maybe that's with a teacher in homeroom. Maybe it's sending a kid out for a drink of water. Maybe it's, it's a lot of different things. And what I find interesting now is, as horrible as this whole pandemic thing has been and having to do things virtually, in my opinion, we were getting away from the middle level message. We were getting too involved in standardized testings and kids meeting a certain standard. And even now, you see every now and then on Facebook or in some media of how the kids are getting behind. And I say, behind what? Behind whom? They are where they are. So we're always going to have to try to meet them where they are. So don't get bogged down in that. And I hope we get away from those standardized tests the high stakes tests that one of the fellows that I used to work with said, high stakes are for tomatoes, not for kids. So to try to go back to Maslow again. They're not going to get to those high standards if you don't address those advocacy relationship concerns with the kids first. So I know I had a principal one time who thought that was the even doing icebreakers was a waste of time because it was time on task. You have to have time on task. You're wasting your science instruction time. So I had to go out and do the research and take it back to my principal and say, well, here, I've got research to back what I'm doing. Where's the research to back what you're telling me to do? And, and he didn't have it, so, saying that I can't get Jeff to really become the student you want him to be unless I work with him in our relationship first and get him to trust me and find out how he's going to be a learner. So, don't let anybody talk you out of being a teacher who works on those soft skills, although I don't think they're soft skills.
That's that time and energy piece of helping them capture their energy. We had feedback from Hunter Hart saying, yes, I always say that none of my fifth graders head to junior high, saying, I sure hope they have a good math curriculum. They're worried about they're going to sit with at lunch. Yeah.
That's right.
I'll tell you, when I was middle school principal, I mean, a position that is fraught with parents being annoyed with you. But I would go to our elementary schools and say, you know what I want you to do to teach your kids so that they're ready for middle school? I want you to teach them how to pack everything they need to go to an activity in the summer. So when they go to their lockers, they know how to pull things. I want you to teach them how to use a combination lock. I want you to teach them how to lose at a game. Play a board game, they lose, like, how do you lose effectively, or how do you not know the answers? And I want you to make sure that they know how to tell a friend that they want to hang out with them. I mean, those were the skills that made transition to middle school so much better. And the parents were always like, what math curriculum should they do over the summer? And I was like, none. Play cards and let them lose, and then teach them how to lose well.
That's exactly right.
I'm just checking.
Any other questions? I don't see anything.
I don't either. I see quite a few. Thanks for the tips. And yeah.
Well, I'm going to say, as we sort of wrap this up then, Jen, I want to thank you and Judy for your knowledge and your expertise on best mid-level practice. Everybody here tonight got a lot of great suggestions of things that they can actually do, really good hands-on things, and I appreciate that. And thank you for the links as well. I have told everybody in the links in the chat a couple of times, to get that Act 48, you need to complete that evaluation, and that evaluation form will be on the website tomorrow. The recordings of all of our sessions, as Judy mentioned, they're all on the PAMLE website, so you can go back and look at those and look at any handouts that were there as well in each of those sessions. Just go back to that website. And I do want to remind you, our next webinar is February 10th. Jen Williams, who is a certified restorative practice trainer, is going to be doing a session for us on restorative practices and just talk about that. And it should be very good. She's spoken, I've heard her speak a number of times on this, and she's very good. And so we're looking forward to that on the 10th. And then also check out our virtual state conference. Jen is going to be presenting there on diversity with that at that conference. And check it out. This session, we have a number, and Judy's presenting there as well. She's going to be talking about mid-level learner. And, there's a lot of great sessions there for people to choose from. And that's on February 27th and 28th. The majority of the sessions are on the 28th. Dr. Debbie Silver, if you've heard Debbie Silver, she's going to be our speaker on Saturday night for an hour. And she's going to entertain people for an hour on middle level and dealing with middle level kids. So it'll be fun. So I want to thank everybody for coming here tonight. I know there's still a few people left. So thank you all so much, and have a great rest of the school year, and hope to see you all in February.
Thank you.
And we appreciate you. Yeah.
Yes, we do.
All right.